Drug king, who was for years one of the world's most wanted men, was gunned down today by Colombian police in the Colombian city of Medellin. His drug cartel was named for the city he controlled for so long. He was only 44, old enough for cocaine to have made him one of the richest men in the world, rich and ruthless enough to have hundreds of people who got in his way killed, from people who ran drugs to people who ran the country.
When Pablo Escobar was shot and killed on top of his aunt's house in 1993, the police rejoiced and the people of Colombia flooded the streets in grief for their most controversial idol. But soon after, they seemed to forget him. Pablo Escobar had luxurious ranches with private zoos, helicopters, and barrels of cash hidden everywhere in Colombia. So what happened to all these after his sudden demise? And what happened to his family, his wife, son, and daughter? Where are they today, and do they still have ties to Pablo's drug empire? Let's find out.
Police say Escobar was killed near a shopping mall in Medellin, Colombia. He was shot to death by members of an elite police squad that had been searching for him since he escaped from this prison outside Medellin a year and a half ago. Colombia's prosecutor general called Escobar's killing excellent for the country.
Aged 44, Escobar was the most wanted man in Colombia and on the DEA's list in the US. He'd made so much money that he'd once burned $2 million just to keep his daughter warm. He was born in 1949 to a farmer and school teacher and grew up with 6 siblings. The Escobar family was very poor, so Pablo grew up dreaming of get-rich-quick schemes. As you probably know, those don't exist. Crime is the only way to make quick cash, but even this is not a guarantee. You have to be especially ruthless to get to the top and make the big bucks. As it turns out, Pablo Escobar was shockingly ruthless. He quickly went from stealing tombstones to commercial robbery to kidnapping rich politicians for ransom money, then killing them. Then he entered the white powder trade, bringing the product from Peru and Bolivia, perfecting it in Colombia, and shipping it to the US. Escobar became responsible for the boom in use in the US. By the time he was 26, he'd amassed $3 million in cash. But there was a problem. Escobar wasn't just a smart businessman. He would kill anyone who got in his way.
Rich and ruthless enough to have hundreds of people who got in his way killed, from people who ran drugs to people who ran the country.
Judges died by the dozens just because they were trying to convict him or have him extradited to the US for his crimes. Then came hundreds of officers, and even high-ranking politicians, assassinated in broad daylight after making promises of tightening Colombian laws against drug traffickers. So the DEA started working together with the Colombian government to put an end to Pablo Escobar's blood empire forever. And that had to start with killing Escobar. In the early 1990s, Escobar had cut a questionable deal with the authorities, giving himself up to spend time in prison of his own making. It was a palace as luxurious as his ranch, where he ate chef-made food, played soccer all day, and conducted his business. But when he heard rumors that he'd be escorted to a regular federal prison, he'd escaped. For the next year and a half, he was on the run, afraid for his life, watching his Medellin cartel fall into pieces. That's right, Pablo's drug empire started crumbling down while he was still alive. The DEA was seizing his white powder shipments, the government was seizing his properties, and the vigilante army Los Pepes was killing his men, one by one. It was a simple tit for tat. Los Pepes were the families of all those killed and wronged by Pablo in the past. The DEA and the Colombian search block finally tracked Pablo Escobar to his aunt's house the day after his 44th birthday in 1993. He couldn't help but to call his son, even though he most likely knew his family was being monitored. On December 2nd, 1993, Escobar was gunned down on top of his aunt's house after he engaged in a shootout with the police.
When Pablo Escobar was killed on that rooftop, the very first message transferred over the radio was, "Viva Colombia! Matamos a Pablo Escobar! Long live Colombia! We've just killed Pablo Escobar."
Yeah, many people celebrated the death of a man who'd been terrorizing the country for 2 decades.
The Medellin cartel was also accused of waging a bombing and terror campaign against Colombian society. Hundreds of civilians, police, judges, and government officials were killed by Escobar's assassins during the last decade. The downing of a Colombian airliner and the assassination of several presidential candidates were also blamed on Escobar and his associates.
Others took to the streets by the thousands, mourning their Robin Hood figure. Indeed, for many people in Colombia, Escobar was a popular philanthropic figure who built soccer pitches, restaurants, and housing for the poor. He gave back to the masses, they thought. What they didn't know, or didn't want to think about, was that Escobar kept 99% of his fortune to himself. And he was so desperate to keep his cash that he had men bury the barrels full of cash in unknown locations, then killed them so that no one would know where the barrels were. Much like Walter White would say in his first 4 seasons of Breaking Bad, Escobar would say he did it all for his family.
You need to understand.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me.
So did Pablo's family get any of his cash? Nope. Zero. When Pablo died, his wife Maria Hanao and their children, Manuela and Juan Pablo, were already under strict supervision by the DEA. So there was no way Maria could become the new Medellin Cartel queenpin, even if she wanted to. However, Maria was never power hungry. She married Pablo when she was 15, in an arrangement that sounds creepily dictatorial. Her whole life she tried to be a good wife and mom and stay out of trouble. After Pablo's death, she wanted nothing to do with his drug empire. She had 2 children to take care of, and Manuela was only 9 at the time. The family wasn't safe at Pablo's luxurious ranch. Now, Los Pepes and the rival cartels were coming for all the remnants of the Medellin cartel. This meant that they could have gotten shot on sight, simply because they're associated with Pablo. The only solution was for them to flee the country, but that would prove to be a huge hassle too for the same reason.
The airlines didn't want to sell any plane tickets to travel and to get away from violence, you know. We stayed in Colombia for a year, waiting for somebody to help us.
After your father died?
After my father's death, and we asked the Vatican, the United Nations, and nobody wanted to help us. So it was our last option if we wanted to stay alive.
Juan Pablo and his family were facing death threats every single day. They had to stay in a hotel room and pay bodyguards to protect them from the people flooding the corridors. But without any money left, they couldn't afford the hotel room or the bodyguards anymore. That's when they changed their names and fled to Argentina. Now they were the Marroquin family, and Juan Pablo took the name of Sebastian.
We changed our identities. It was the only way. When we changed our names, the next day we were free.
The family moved to Argentina and tried to start afresh there, but the trouble was far from over. In 1999, Maria and Sebastian were arrested for Pablo Escobar's crimes: money laundering, kidnapping, and blackmailing. Within a few months, they were released. There was no evidence tying them to any of Pablo's crimes. They were only arrested because the police figured out who they were. Sebastian and his mom were never guilty of Pablo's empire. The incident sent Manuela, now using the name Juana, into extreme bouts of anxiety and depression. Sadly, she had even tried to take her own life. Today, she lives with her brother for her own health and safety. Reportedly, she lives in constant anxiety, afraid that she or her family will get punished for her father's crimes. Pablo's family slowly came out of the shadows over the last decade. Maria and Juan Pablo took back their names and published books about their experiences with Pablo. Today, Juan Pablo advocates peace, and when he speaks about his father, he warns people about glorifying a violent man. He even spoke against the Narcos series for this exact reason.
Jūs pats žiūrėjot Netflix'o serialą Narcos? Kokie įspūdžiai, kokie jausmai buvo žiūrint ir į save, be abejo?
Sí, la he visto y por eso me he atrevido a criticarla, si no, no lo habría hecho. Es la versión de la DEA sobre mi padre, no la versión real.
If you were to estimate, how many murders is he directly or indirectly responsible for?
Well, there is not an official record of that, but I believe that it is almost about 3,000 people.
Once a teenage girl ran to the police to tell them about the Medellin cartel sexual exploitation of teenage virgin girls. Escobar had men infiltrated in the police, so he found out. His response? He killed 40 underage girls. Yeah, this is the kind of drug empire he ran. And as he died, Pablo left behind $3 billion. However, his family lived in poverty for years, and Juan Pablo was almost kidnapped 9 times. People had heard of his father's riches and assumed Juan Pablo had his money. Pablo left nothing but pain and suffering for his family. Meanwhile, Escobar's luxurious estates were either seized by the authorities or stolen by rival gangs, finally powerful enough as the Medellin cartel was being reduced to ashes. Remember Pablo's hacienda of Napoles? He had pools, helicopters, and a private zoo with hippos and other exotic animals. As soon as the news of Escobar's death broke out, dozens of people stormed the palace, looking to loot whatever they could find. But there wasn't much they could find. The money was buried far away from the house, and the government was about to take control of the whole property. After the government seized it, some of the estate was gifted to low-income families. What about the animals? Most of them were given to any zoos that would take them. However, some of the hippos were left free to roam Colombia. And as you already know, there are no hippos endemic to Colombia. But in the last 30 years, the animals thrived, starting their own happy families. In the 1980s, Escobar illegally imported 4 hippos from Africa. Today, there are at least 130, and that's an issue for the endemic species.
Scientists warn the hippos do not have a natural predator in Colombia and are a potential problem for the biodiversity, since their feces change the composition of the rivers and could impact the habitat of manatees and capybaras.
There's concern the hippos have already started to displace native wildlife, like the threatened manatee, and keep getting too close for comfort.
So today there are efforts to export many of these hippos to their home continent in Africa. Pablo Escobar's drug empire is still making waves 3 decades after Escobar's death. The villa itself on the Napoles ranch was left to rot as an insult to a drug lord who caused the death of thousands. Its ruins are now a museum for curious tourists. Then there's Pablo's home at the time of his death, the Monaco building. In 1993, the government seized the Monaco building and turned it into a tourist attraction. They were hoping to get back some of the money that Escobar had stolen from them. However, the guided tours didn't last long. For the Colombian communities, the Monaco building was just a reminder of the death and pain caused by Escobar. In 2018, the government brought down the building and turned the land into a memorial for Escobar's many victims. Pablo's other luxurious ranch, La Manuela, was also left to rot. Half of La Manuela had already been bombed to oblivion by a rival cartel while Escobar was on the run in 1992. After Escobar's death, scavengers raided the building and stole whatever valuables they could find. Then, it was time for nature to take over. Finally, there's La Catedral, the billion-dollar prison Escobar built for himself. Of course, a prison with a casino, spa, soccer field, and a high-end restaurant won't stand as a regular prison. So throughout the 1990s, looters stormed La Catedral and its grounds, hoping to find all the cash that was said to be buried there. However, no one found anything. Funny enough, today, La Catedral is an actual cathedral, taken over by the Benedictine monks and used as a space for prayer and remembering Escobar's victims. Speaking of Pablo's buried money, to this day, most of Escobar's hidden money remains hidden. The DEA seized as much as they could, but they didn't dig the whole of Colombia looking for the piles of cash. But every now and then, there would be a big discovery. In November 1989, someone found 3 barrels underground. They dug them out, and inside they found $5.3 million wrapped in plastic bags. In 1990, someone dug out $26 million and 150 kilograms of gold bars. Imagine that. Then in 2009, a farmer found $6 million buried in the jungle. The site wasn't far away from Pablo's famous white powder jungle factories. In 2015, a 65-year-old farmer called Jose Cartalos was digging an irrigation trench. He struck something strange with his shovel. That's when he found a blue plastic container in the ground. As he dug, he realized there was a bunch of them. Jose was living on top of $600 million, and he had no idea. And in 2020, it was Escobar's new nephew, Nicolas, who discovered $18 million hidden in the walls of Pablo's former home. The first thing that shocked him was not the sight, but the smell.
El olor era impresionante, o sea, ese olor es peor que una mortecina multiplicado por 100.
Next to the money was a typewriter, a golden pen, several satellite phones, and a camera with an undeveloped film roll. So did Pablo's drug empire make anyone rich? No. No one except the government. If you find Pablo's cash barrels, you have to hand them over to the authorities. It's illicit money after all. As of today, $75 million have been seized by the Colombian authorities, but there might be another billion or so buried in the jungles. Pablo Escobar might have been forgotten, but his empire is still alive in the nooks and crannies of the Colombian jungle and in the minds of those affected by him. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about Pablo Escobar's cartel? Does any cartel today match his empire? Let me know in the comment section. And before you go, make sure to click the thumbs up button and subscribe for more. See you all next time.